different. Sometimes I weave and talk to y'all, and I'm trying to switch from watercolor paints to watercolor palettes, pats, and at first I thought it was that the pens were harder than the pats, and now that I'm back at the pats, I'm like, oh no, everything's just harder if I don't practice it. Great. So anyway, I wanted to chat with you about I have an upcoming class, so it's weaving support constellations, and it's going to be in person, but I'm looking forward to offering it online. So this first one will be in Montreal, and I wanted to talk about why I'm teaching this class. There's many reasons, one of which is I've been part of and had a support weave and found it immeasurably helpful, but in ways that maybe are not readily assumed. And I think that that would be really cool to share. I've also had I've had a lot of folks that I've spoken to about pod mapping, because that's what I see people calling this work of building a support weave. But that's not actually, well, it's not really what pod mapping was made for, according to the Mingus articles that I've seen. But what I see is people using it, for just general support mapping, which is an awesome tool. Like, yes, do that. And that is not this. And I've walked several people through the process of building their support weave. Sorry. It's one of those testosterone days where your voice is just like, so, I apologize. Me. Okay. Hi. So support weaves or pod mapping. So I hear people talking about, like, they're saying that they want to put together a pod map. And then what I'm hearing them say they're doing is they're mapping out their general support network. That's great work. That's lovely. That is not the same as pod mapping. My understanding of it is that it is very specific to social justice harm and accountability and support. And that is not the same as just generally, if I need support, who am I going to call? These are different things. So, first of all, that kept happening and I was getting so annoyed about it. Like, okay, that contempt is mine. And so I started talking to more people about pod mapping and the use of it as something specific. A harm has happened, and people need to be supported. The person who has been harmed, the person who has done harm, both, I believe, deserve to be supported. So, if we want to be anti-carceral, please. So, and then it's a determined amount of time. So it's specific to the what, and it's specific to the when. And again, that's not how I saw people approaching pod mapping. I saw them approaching it as general support web. And so I was, a partner of mine was a part of a web, pod for somebody who had previously had social harm done. A popular person of color who was doing another activity, and the last activity had caused harm. And so they put together a support pod to help them through the next activity, assuming that that might happen again. And over the course of 2 years, maybe, at least a year, I got to be privy to a lot of the behind the scenes mechanisms and logistics of how they were making this work, and learned a lot of things that way. And then fast forward, last year, 2 years ago, my husband and I decided that he needed to move into a retirement community that gave him on-site support. And I didn't want to do that. I'm 40. He's 77. So, and we'd always known that we would make this transition and it was going to be coming someday. We've been together for 20 years. Like, this was not a surprise. But, you know, it's sad to have to face it. And so I put together a support weave for me to support me for this process. And it was very sweet because I got my people together and we had our first Zoom meeting, and one of them really came out the gate beautifully fiery. That's one thing I love about this person, elder, non-binary person, just like out the gate with the fire, was like, okay, we need to know what's going on with your husband. We need to know this information. What is he looking for? What is the date? All of this. And I was just so shocked, and I was like, oh, huh. Thank you, but no, I actually don't need support figuring those things out. I've been taking care of this man who's been very sick, much of the last 20 years. Like, I didn't call you together to help me. I know how to do this work. This labor is fine. It's my heart, actually, that I need help with over the next year as we make this transition. I've been with this partner for 20 years, living together for the most part, all of that. So that's an intense change, especially as somebody at 40 who's lived a very particular life and then is suddenly going to change that so drastically. So one of the first things we did with my pod was talk about what was the specific ask? What was the time frame for that specific ask? And then what would be needed to fulfill the support for the ask? So I knew that I was going to need someone to check on my heart, my spirit, and call me in for that work. I knew that I was going to need somebody to notice if I'm not showering or I'm not feeding myself, and figure out with me in advance how we were going to handle that. I knew I needed somebody to take me out for walks in nature, get me out of the city, and just be in nature for a time, because that is deeply resourcing for me. So there were things I knew I needed to keep my heart healthy, my spirit healthy through the upcoming 12 months. Because we wanted him to be able to make this move fully of his own accord in full sovereignty, and I wanted to give him lots of time. And even that was not set in stone. So we then talked about each of my support weave members. We talked about what they could bring, what were their offerings, and then I talked about what were the offerings I wished of them. So one person offered to bring me food. I know that person doesn't like to cook, and they're not gonna buy me food to bring. So I was like, thank you. No. Actually, I was hoping you could support me with this thing that we've already built trust around and you're really good at and requires a lot less energy, in fact. And that worked out well. So I didn't just map out the who was going to be supporting me. I mapped out in what ways they were going to be supporting me each, and then asked them to figure out with each other how to map out the logistics of coordination without me. Because that's the point. If I'm not well, I'm not here to manage this. And this is why This is why I didn't like the idea of, so often we are like the axle point on a wheel, and we have all these people that are connected to us. And maybe some of them are connected to each other. But a lot of folks don't have people they know that are interconnected. And so I specifically called this a support weave because I wanted to, especially as somebody who functions very fucking well when I'm unwell, so it can be hard to notice from other people and from me. Um, I knew that I needed people to be connected to each other, that was going to be important. They needed to talk to each other. And one thing that I learned from this other pod I'd been privy to hearing about was the power of a back channel, so that the folks can figure out support without the person in the center having to be a part of all of the logistics. And that kind of brings me into silk ring theory, which is this idea that the person in the middle who needs the care, there's circles of people that are closest, close, less close, so on and so forth. And the idea with silk ring theory is you support inward. So if you're on this level, you support here and in. But even better, just like tier it, T-I-E-R. But the person in the center, they get to dump out to anywhere. They can, like, if somebody's available for it, like sovereignty and consent, I am implying here. But that person can dump out. And then each ring, so the closest people to them, has to dump out, 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 out. So if you're needing support yourself, then you don't go to somebody who's even closer to that person. You go to somebody who's even further than you are. So bringing that piece into this idea of pod mapping. So now we've got two different technologies that neither of which are really built specifically for this, but they're strong starting points. So the other thing that I've heard happen multiple times now is people who have taken a pod mapping class and had this happen, or just people that I was talking with who were asking me, how do I do this thing? Where they come and they say, that was the most depressing thing in my fucking life. I had nobody to name. Or I had lots of people to name and everybody told me no when I asked them. Ooh, that's damaging shit, y'all. Especially for folks who statistically are more likely to have lost family and friends, specifically in not having support from them around their needs that often are touching into their sexual and gender identities, their race identities, all the different forms of oppression that we're facing. We all have different interconnections of how these have harmed us, and often it's people not showing up. So I was like, oh, fuck this. Like, I don't want that to be happening to people. I can't encourage people to go do a pod map or support weave if this is like common occurrence. So how do I mitigate for that? Oof. I went back to the pod mapping stuff, Mia Mingus's stuff, and it talks about people closest and then next, and it also talks about like organizations or community groups, these kind of support networks. But what it's missing is all of the queer magic. It's missing all of the queer magic. It's missing all of the indigenous teachings. It's missing all of the ways in which we resource and support ourselves and each other without humans. So whether that is, I'm doing awful at trying to paint and talk to y'all, but anyway, well, I'm enjoying that anyway. Um, so calling upon your lineage and your culture and your history and your ancestors, writing out and noting, mapping out what rests you versus what recharges you, because those are different for most people in a lot of ways, and both are important at different reasons, and sometimes you need both. Sometimes you need just to rest, sometimes you need to rest and refill. So um, it left out mindfulness practices, painting, meditating, running, journaling, left out all of these self-resourcing things. And so I started inviting all of these pieces in. How do we resource far more broadly than individuals? Um, Maybe you don't have a dog, but dogs are really incredibly resourcing for you. Do you have a friend who will let you pup sit when you need some of that love? Do you have a human pup that's willing to come and do some pup play with you when you're seeking that kind of connection? Could you just go to the dog park and play with the dogs there? I love that. I don't do it. Do y'all do that? I haven't met anybody else who does that, but I love going into the dog park and just playing with the dogs. I don't have a dog. I walk in, I walk out, but um, it's a type of thing that I feel like if we didn't have stranger danger so much, I would totally do with kids. Like I would just get on the play swings and like play with the kids all the time. But first of all, not from this body anymore. People like pull their children away from me sometimes, and uh, and also like you just can't do that these days. But man, that would be great. Anyway, I do that with the dogs, and people ask me, "Oh, do you have a dog?" And I'm, no, not anymore. Not anymore. It's been 25 years, but they don't need to know that. They allow me to play with their dogs, so I'm happy. Anyhow, resourcing beyond humans. So that's a big part of support weaving and pulling in all of these orientations. So yeah, I think there's connection and resilience to be built into these things, and I don't think that it makes sense to just start with what can you get from others. I think that's really built for a different tool. And the social justice use of this technology, pod mapping, I think that makes a lot of sense. But for a lot of the ways in which I'm seeing people telling me they are or want to use pod mapping technology, it doesn't make sense. So let's talk about doing something else. And I've been calling them support weaves because I really think that it's so important for whoever shows up and agrees to show up that you focus on your ability to be consistent more than what you're able to bring. And I say that because we know that it's better to be a good enough parent who's fucking consistent than a stellar parent who is erratic in their love and care. It's better to be consistent. That's more important for us. And so when asking people about being in a pod to be intentional about what they offer, really making this point that it's more important that you offer something you can do fully and consistently within your limitations. Obviously there's always caveats, but something that's like low bar, genuinely, fully, you can show up for this thing and you know it, barring, whatever, but than it is to offer something else and not meet it. Because you can always go over, you can always like do even more, you know. But to fail somebody when they're in crisis, when they're most in need, like we have to be really intentionable. Wow, intent. We must be intent about not causing more harm. That's so important. And I think this is a good way to try and circumvent that. And this is an area where I would love to see other ideas around tweaking that particular part, because this feels less fleshed out than a lot of the other stuff in relationship to this support weaving, is how do we support one another in really knowing how to name where our capacity lies truly to be able to consistently show up. And that doesn't mean 100% each time, it just means consistently show up. So anyway, if you've got ideas about that, I want to know what they are, because yeah, that could be more robust, and I know it. So so much of what I've learned about being in multiple different pods, both at the center and in support of others, is the necessity of self-resourcing for the person being supported. Because the group gets to have this opportunity of being a net of support that invites accountability and invites the person to self-resource and self-care when they're able, in different ways that they're able, and helping them find those things and reach for those things. And also showing up in the ways that are needed by them. So all of this together. I think it's pretty powerful to have both self-resourcing that is encouraged by others and very specifically, as well as these dynamic relationships of holding. So, shit's gonna happen. I've seen this in most of the pods I've been a part of. Like, at some point, shit's gonna happen, and things are gonna go wonk, and everyone's gonna be like, "Wah." Or what happened in mine was shit went wonk on multiple levels, and then I ended up feeling really fucking alone. Like, oh, all but one of you didn't fucking show up. Let me be with that reality right now. And at the class, I'll go more into that story. Maybe I'll come back here and talk more about that story if someone wants. But yeah, it's an intense place to be. And I've watched other people go through that where you're like, oh, y'all said you were going to be here to show up for me, and you're fucking not. That's a hard place to be. And I'm seeing that get handled in different ways. So I'm excited to have that conversation, because it's just a reality that I think people should assume that that's a probability rather than a possibility, and prepare for it. And it's great if they don't have to use that plan. But yeah, so shaping resilient weaves that push at traditional boundaries and offer something different, and also whose tradition? White. I'm talking like white Eastern European nuclear family traditions, pushing at that to be more expansive, and create a weave instead of a network of nodes. Well, that is its own version of a weave, but okay, different rabbit hole, another day. Yeah, so if you have questions about pod mapping, silk ring theory, support weaving, creating support constellations, if you just want to hop on here and chat with me about it, yeah, I'd love to. What interests me the most about these, and I've got lots of stories that I'm excited to be able to share at this class, but I think what interests me the most is that they provide an opportunity for us to be deeply held and held accountable to our own self-holding. I think that makes sense. So we get to bring people together, and they weave a network that can hold us. And part of that holding is supporting us being resourced enough to reach for and build a habit of reaching for our self-care and doing it. Yeah, I think that's my favorite thing I've seen. And part of it is just that I went through that in my pod, and it was deeply impactful. But folks who have done something like this, I'd love to hear what was the biggest lesson, most impactful thing that you got out of it. That would be really cool. I would love to hear that. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay, well, so much for the painting, but love y'all. Bye.